I knew something was wrong before I even stepped outside. It was a clear Arizona morning, the kind of brutal blue sky that usually made my solar app look like a jackpot machine by 10 o'clock. No clouds. No dust storm. No smoke in the air. Just pure desert sunlight pouring over Willow Park Estates. But when I opened the energy monitor on my phone, my production graph had collapsed like someone had thrown a blanket over my roof. At first, I thought the inverter had failed. Then I walked into the backyard and saw the real problem. Behind the clubhouse, right along the edge of the HOA common area, there was a brand new stone wall that had not been there 2 weeks earlier. It was massive, almost decorative in a way that made it worse. Stacked tan stone, black iron trim, built-in lights, and a bronze plaque that read, Willow Park Clubhouse Expansion. The thing rose higher than the second-story roofline in places, and at that exact hour, its shadow stretched straight across the south-facing side of my house. Across my solar panels. Across the one part of my property that had been legally protected before I ever bought the home. I stood there with my phone in one hand, watching the app refresh every few seconds while my system produced less than half of what it should have been making. Those panels were not decoration to me. They ran my house through the worst heat of the summer. They charged the battery backup my mother depended on when the grid flickered during heat waves. They were the reason I could keep the air conditioning steady without choosing between comfort and a power bill. And the HOA had just built an 18-foot wall directly in front of the sun. By noon, the shadow had moved across almost the entire collection area. By 2, my battery was nowhere near full. By evening, I was pulling expensive peak-hour power from the grid while the HOA newsletter landed in my inbox, celebrating the wall as a symbol of modern community pride. A few weeks later, that same wall would become the most expensive mistake Willow Park had ever made. County planning would reopen the permit file. A building inspector would measure the height. A solar consultant would model the shadow path. The HOA would be forced to tear down $180,000 of stonework, reimburse my costs, and explain to furious residents why nobody on the board had bothered to read the recorded solar access easement attached to my deed. But that morning, Denise Whitmore, the HOA president, was still acting like she had won. She treated my solar panels like a personal preference. She treated my power loss like a minor inconvenience. She treated the sun itself like something the HOA could block if the wall looked expensive enough. So before you decide this was just a fight over a shadow, think about it for a second and comment what you would do. What happens when an HOA does not step onto your land, does not touch your roof, does not break a window, but still damages your property by blocking the one thing your system legally needs to function? I did not yell at the contractors. I did not damage the wall. I went back inside, opened the folder from my closing documents, and found the page Denise had never bothered to read. The HOA had built a wall against the sun. But my deed had already claimed the light. My name is Caleb Morris, and before Willow Park Estates built that wall, I was the kind of homeowner an HOA usually ignored. I was 43, working as an independent HVAC technician in southern Arizona, spending most days on rooftops, in crawl spaces, and beside air conditioning units that always seemed to fail during the hottest week of the year. I was not wealthy. I was not connected. I did not have a family attorney waiting on speed dial. I was just a practical man who knew what heat could do to a house, a power bill, and a person's health when the temperature sat above 110 degrees for too long. That was why I bought my house. It was not the biggest house in Willow Park Estates. It was not the newest. It sat near the back of the neighborhood, close to the clubhouse, on a lot most buyers had ignored because it backed up to the HOA common area instead of a mountain view. But it had one thing I cared about more than granite counters or a 3-car garage. The roof was perfect for solar. The south-facing slope was wide, clean, and almost completely exposed from mid-morning through the afternoon. The previous owner had installed high-efficiency solar panels, a battery backup, and a monitoring system that showed production by the minute. When I toured the house, I remember standing in the driveway, looking up at those panels, and thinking they were not just an upgrade. They were security. My mother, Ruth, lived with me. She was 71 then, stubborn, kind, and still convinced she could water the front plants at noon if I did not catch her first. She used a CPAP machine at night and had a few small medical devices that needed reliable power. In Arizona, summer outages are not just inconvenient. They can become dangerous fast. The solar system and battery backup gave me a margin of safety. If the grid strained during a heat wave, I had power stored. If rates spiked in the afternoon, I had my own production. If the neighborhood went dark for an hour, my mother's room stayed cool. That system was one of the reasons I paid more than I wanted to for the house. During closing, the title officer pointed out something unusual in the documents. Attached to the deed was a recorded solar access easement. It protected the solar collection area on my south-facing roof from unreasonable obstruction during certain daylight hours. At the time, I did not fully appreciate how rare or important that was. I only knew it meant the people who designed the subdivision had planned for solar access before the clubhouse expansion, before Denise Whitmore's board, before anyone decided a decorative wall mattered more than sunlight. The easement was not hidden. It was recorded. It was part of the public record. It ran with the property. It described the protected collection area, the general sun path, and the hours when nearby structures could not cast a significant shadow without proper review and written consent. The title officer even told me to keep that page somewhere safe. So I did. For 2 years, life was quiet. I paid my dues. I kept my yard clean. I fixed my neighbor's air conditioner once for the cost of parts because she was a widow and it was July. I helped an older couple replace a thermostat after the HOA maintenance vendor charged them for a service call and never showed up. I did not attend meetings unless something directly affected my lot. I did not complain about the clubhouse noise, even when evening events echoed across the common area. I honestly believed that if I stayed reasonable, Willow Park would stay reasonable too. Then Denise became HOA president. Denise Whitmore had a talent for making luxury sound like duty. She wanted Willow Park to look more upscale, more exclusive, more like the gated communities across town. Under her, the HOA started talking about branding, curb appeal, and modernization. The clubhouse became her favorite project. New patio furniture. New landscaping. New lighting. New stonework. A privacy wall to hide equipment and create what she called a more elegant community backdrop. To most residents, it sounded harmless. To me, it sounded expensive. But I still did not fight it. The clubhouse was on common area. The board had meetings. Residents voted on budgets. I figured if they wanted to spend their money on stone and lights, that was their choice. What I did not know was that nobody had checked the easement. Nobody had studied the shadow path. Nobody had compared the wall height to the protected solar zone on my deed. They were designing a monument to community pride directly in front of a legal right they had never bothered to read. If you own a home with solar, or any feature protected by deed, easement, or county record, do not assume the HOA remembers what is attached to your property. Save the documents. Read them. Keep copies where you can find them. Because the day someone builds too close, too high, or too confidently, that paper may be the only thing standing between your property and their expensive mistake. I thought the wall would be ugly. I thought it might block part of my view. I never imagined it would block the sunlight my house legally depended on. And I never imagined Denise would tell me, with a straight face, that the HOA had no obligation to design around the sun. The first week of construction did not scare me. It annoyed me, sure. Nobody enjoys waking up to the sound of concrete saws, forklifts, backup alarms, and contractors yelling measurements across a parking lot. But I had spent my whole career around job sites. Noise did not bother me the way it bothered some residents. I knew projects looked ugly before they looked finished, and I told myself the clubhouse expansion was just another expensive HOA idea that would pass. The wall started as a row of stakes. They appeared behind the clubhouse, right along the common area that bordered my backyard. Then came orange paint, then trenches, then steel forms and concrete footings. At first, the layout seemed low enough. I assumed they were building a screen wall for the HVAC equipment or a decorative privacy barrier around the patio. Something waist-high, maybe 8 feet at most. Then the stone pallets arrived. Massive tan blocks stacked on flatbed trucks. Black metal trim. Rebar cages. Concrete columns. Decorative caps that looked like they belonged at the entrance to a resort, not behind a neighborhood clubhouse. The wall grew fast. Every day when I came home from work, it was taller than it had been that morning. First it cleared the old fence. Then it cleared the clubhouse utility shed. Then it rose high enough that I could see its shadow crawling across the back edge of my roof before the afternoon was over. That was when I sent the first email. I asked the HOA for the approved plans, the final height, the setback review, and whether anyone had checked the recorded solar access easement on my lot. I attached a screenshot from my solar monitoring app showing an unusual dip in production during the hours when the wall shadow crossed the panels. Denise replied the next day with 3 short paragraphs. She said the clubhouse expansion had been approved by the board. She said the wall was located entirely on HOA common area. She said the project was intended to improve community aesthetics, hide mechanical equipment, and increase property values. She did not mention the easement. So I wrote back and asked again. This time, there was no answer. A week later, the main wall was complete, and the production loss was impossible to ignore. On a normal June day, my system would climb steadily through the morning, peak around midday, and keep producing strong power well into the afternoon. After the wall went up, the graph looked like someone had sliced out the best part of the day. The panels started strong, then dropped sharply when the shadow hit the south-facing slope. My battery, which usually reached full charge before the highest utility rates kicked in, was sitting half-empty by late afternoon. That mattered. It mattered because summer bills in Arizona do not forgive mistakes. It mattered because heat waves do not wait for HOA meetings. It mattered because my mother's bedroom needed to stay cool, and her CPAP needed reliable power at night. The battery was not a toy. It was not a green lifestyle accessory. It was part of how I protected my home. I took photos every day at the same times. 10 in the morning. 11. Noon. 1. 2. 3. I stood in the same place on the patio and photographed the shadow line crossing the roof. The evidence became clearer with each picture. The wall was not casting a harmless sliver of shade. It was blocking the protected collection area during the exact hours my deed said it should not be blocked. Then came the heat wave. The temperature hit 114 degrees by mid-afternoon, and every air conditioner in Willow Park seemed to be fighting for its life. I had 3 service calls that day from neighbors whose units could not keep up. By the time I got home, my own system was running hard, my battery was barely charged, and the solar app showed another deep drop caused by the wall. That evening, the grid flickered. Only for a few seconds, but long enough for my mother to look up from her chair and ask if the power was going out. I told her it was fine, but I was not fine. I walked outside, looked at that stone wall glowing under its new accent lights, and felt the kind of anger that does not make you loud. It makes you focused. At the next HOA meeting, I brought printed graphs from my solar app, photos of the shadow path, and a copy of the easement page from my closing documents. I waited through 20 minutes of Denise praising the clubhouse project, talking about community pride, modern design, and long-term value. Then I stood up and explained that the wall was interfering with a recorded solar access easement attached to my property. Denise smiled like I had complained about a paint color. She told the room that the HOA could not design every improvement around one homeowner's rooftop equipment. She said the wall was permitted, approved, and built on association land. She suggested my solar system may have had maintenance issues unrelated to the project. Then she said the sentence that made half the room chuckle and made my attorney very interested later. The HOA was not responsible for where the sun happened to fall. That was how she framed it. Not a legal right. Not an easement. Not measurable energy loss. Just sunlight, moving around like weather, and me being difficult about it. After the meeting, 2 board members pulled me aside and told me to be reasonable. One said the wall looked beautiful and that the whole neighborhood had paid for it. Another said if every homeowner could object based on shadows, nothing would ever get built. I asked both of them whether they had read the solar access easement before voting. Neither answered. The next morning, I found a notice in my email from the property management company. It said contractors had reported that I was photographing and recording near the work area, and that continued conduct could be considered harassment or interference with an HOA-approved project. It warned me not to approach workers or place monitoring equipment near the common boundary. That notice told me 2 things. First, Denise was not going to fix this voluntarily. Second, she was already trying to turn my evidence gathering into misconduct. So I became more careful. I stopped speaking to contractors entirely. I took photos only from my property. I saved every app reading. I downloaded production data. I kept copies of the newsletter celebrating the wall. I saved Denise's emails, the meeting notes, and the notice accusing me of harassment. Meanwhile, the wall kept doing exactly what I said it was doing. Every clear day, the shadow cut across my panels. Every afternoon, my production dropped. Every evening, my battery stayed lower than it should have. My utility bill started climbing, and Denise kept acting like the only thing being damaged was her ribbon-cutting moment. If you are watching this and you have ever been told you are overreacting to something that affects your home, comment below, because that is often the first move. They do not answer the document. They attack your tone. They do not address the evidence. They act like your objection is the problem. But my objection was not the problem. The wall was. And what Denise did not know was that my solar app was not just showing lost power. It was creating a time-stamped record of exactly when, where, and how her wall was violating a right the HOA had no authority to ignore. She thought this was about aesthetics. I was about to prove it was about property law. I did not touch the wall. That was the first decision I made, because every angry part of me wanted to make the problem physical. I wanted to stand at the clubhouse with my dead battery graph printed in red ink. I wanted to demand answers from Denise in front of every resident walking past that new stone monument. I wanted to ask the contractor why nobody had checked a recorded easement before stacking 18 feet of stone in front of a solar collection area. But I had spent enough years on job sites to know one thing clearly. The person who loses control first usually becomes the story. So I stopped arguing and started measuring. The first thing I did was export every piece of data from my solar monitoring app. Not just the bad week after the wall went up, but 12 months of production history. I downloaded daily output reports, hourly production curves, battery charge logs, and peak production averages from the same months the previous year. I wanted to show what the system normally produced under clear Arizona skies before the clubhouse wall existed, and what changed after the shadow crossed the roof. The difference was not subtle. Before the wall, my system climbed cleanly through the morning, peaked near midday, and carried strong production into the afternoon. After the wall, the graph dropped hard during the protected hours, like a cliff had been cut into the middle of the day. The weather was the same. The panels were the same. The inverter was the same. The only new object between my roof and the sun was Denise's wall. Then I built a shadow file. Every day for 2 weeks, I took photos from the same 3 spots in my yard. One from the patio. One from the side gate. One from the far corner where I could see the wall, the roof, and the shadow line in a single frame. I took them at 10, 11, noon, 1, 2, and 3. I kept the timestamps visible. I saved the raw images. I recorded short videos showing the shadow moving across the panels while the app showed the production dropping at the exact same time. I also saved everything the HOA sent me. Denise's emails. The Clubhouse newsletter. The meeting agenda. The notice accusing me of harassing contractors. The celebration post on the Willow Park resident portal calling the wall a landmark investment in community beauty. I even saved screenshots of residents praising the wall, because the more they celebrated the project, the harder it would be for the board to pretend later that it was just a minor fence repair. After that, I opened my closing folder. I kept it in the cabinet above my desk, in a blue accordion file that still had the title company's sticker on the front. Inside were the documents I had barely understood when I bought the house but had been smart enough not to throw away. The deed. The title policy. The subdivision plat. The HOA covenants. The recorded easement page. There it was. Solar access easement. I read it slowly this time. Not like a buyer trying to get through closing. Like a homeowner trying to protect his house. The easement described the protected solar collection area on my south-facing roof. It restricted structures that would cast a substantial shadow across that area during the hours between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. It required written consent or special review for any project that could interfere with that access. And it was recorded against surrounding parcels and common area within the subdivision. That meant Denise was wrong. This was not about me asking the HOA to care about my preference. This was not about me demanding special treatment for rooftop equipment. This was a recorded property right, sitting in the public record, attached to my home before her clubhouse wall ever existed. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office. I gave them the book and page number listed on the easement. The clerk confirmed it was still active. No release had been recorded. No amendment had removed my lot. No document had extinguished it. Then I called the planning office and asked whether the clubhouse wall permit included a solar easement review. The answer was no. The permit described a decorative privacy wall and mechanical screen. It did not mention a solar access corridor. It did not show the shadow study. It did not include my written consent. It did not even identify the protected collection area shown in the recorded document. That was when I hired the experts. The first was a licensed surveyor. He measured the distance between the wall and my roofline, verified the height of the wall, and marked the relevant angles from the easement documents. The second was a solar consultant who specialized in production loss and sun path analysis. He pulled weather data, compared my system output before and after construction, and built a model showing exactly how the wall's shadow crossed my panels during the protected hours. When his preliminary report came back, I stared at the numbers for a long time. The production loss was real. The timing matched. The shadow path matched. The protected hours matched. The wall was not just inconvenient. It was measurable interference. Then I called Rachel Kim. Rachel was a real estate and land use attorney in Phoenix. I sent her everything, the easement, the deed, the production logs, the photos, the videos, the county permit record, the HOA emails, the newsletter, and the expert reports. She called me back the same afternoon and said the one sentence I had needed to hear. This was not a solar complaint. This was an easement violation. From that point on, I stopped thinking like a frustrated homeowner and started thinking like someone preparing a file. I created a timeline from the first construction stake to the first production drop. I calculated extra utility charges. I saved receipts. I documented the heat wave. I noted the nights when the battery failed to reach full charge. I wrote down how many times my mother's room had to rely entirely on grid power because the solar system could not recover from the afternoon shade. If you are listening to this and you have a dispute with an HOA, do not underestimate data. A photo can be dismissed as one bad angle. A complaint can be called emotional. But a time-stamped pattern, backed by records, experts, permits, and recorded documents, becomes much harder to ignore. Save this story and share it with someone who owns solar, because the day you need the paperwork is not the day to start looking for it. By the end of that week, Rachel had everything she needed. She placed the solar access easement beside the HOA's permit application and found the mistake that would turn Denise's beautiful clubhouse wall into a legal liability. The HOA had asked permission to build a decorative wall. They had never disclosed that the wall would block a protected right to sunlight. And in property law, what they failed to disclose was about to matter more than everything they claimed to improve. Rachel's demand letter went out on a Tuesday morning, and it was the first document in this entire mess that treated the wall for what it really was. Not a design feature. Not a clubhouse improvement. Not a matter of personal taste. A physical obstruction interfering with a recorded property right. The letter was sent to Willow Park HOA, Denise Whitmore, the property management company, the general contractor, and the county planning office. Rachel attached the deed, the recorded solar access easement, the county permit record, the surveyor's measurements, the solar consultant's shadow analysis, my production logs, my battery charge history, the heatwave utility data, and photos showing the shadow crossing my panels during the protected hours. The letter did not sound emotional. That was what made it heavy. It did not complain that the wall was ugly. It did not ask the board to be nicer. It stated that Willow Park HOA had constructed an 18-foot wall that cast a substantial shadow over my protected solar collection area between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, in direct conflict with the recorded easement attached to my property. Then Rachel demanded corrective action. The HOA had to stop any additional work on the wall, provide all approved plans, disclose all change orders, identify who approved the final height, compensate me for measurable energy losses, and submit a proposal to remove or modify the portion of the wall violating the easement. Denise's response came through the HOA attorney 2 days later, and it sounded exactly like I expected. The HOA claimed the wall was properly approved, located on common area, and built for the benefit of the entire community. They argued that my panels still produced some electricity and that normal variation in solar output could not be blamed entirely on the wall. They also suggested that allowing one homeowner to challenge a completed HOA improvement would create a dangerous precedent. Rachel read the letter once, then told me they had just made their first serious mistake. They were arguing fairness. The deed was arguing property. That difference mattered. A solar easement is not a favor. It is not a suggestion. It is not something the HOA can ignore because a wall looks expensive or because residents like the new clubhouse design. It is a recorded limitation on what surrounding property owners can do if their construction interferes with the protected solar access area. The second mistake came from the contractor's documents. When Rachel requested the approved permit package, the original plan showed a decorative wall much lower than the finished structure. The permit described a privacy screen for mechanical equipment and a small architectural backdrop for the patio. But the final wall had decorative towers, a raised stone cap, and extended sections that were not shown at the same height in the approved documents. One change order explained why. Denise's board had requested a taller, premium visual barrier, after several residents complained that the clubhouse HVAC equipment could still be seen from the patio. That change added height exactly where the shadow problem became worst. It also happened after the permit review, without any evidence that the HOA had gone back to the county for a revised solar impact review. That was the crack Rachel needed. She forwarded the change order to the county planning office with the easement attached. Within days, the county reopened the permit file. The planning officer confirmed that the permit application had not disclosed the recorded solar access corridor. It had not included a shadow study. It had not identified my protected roof area. It had not included written consent from me. Suddenly, Denise's beautiful wall was no longer a completed community project. It was a permit problem. The solar consultant's final report made it worse. He compared clear sky production from the previous year to the same dates after the wall was built. He used sun path modeling, weather data, panel orientation, and time-stamped photos. The conclusion was direct: The wall was causing significant shade on the protected collection area during the easement hours, reducing output and preventing the battery from reaching normal charge levels during high-demand summer conditions. That report turned my frustration into numbers. Lost kilowatt-hours. Higher grid usage. Reduced backup reliability. Measurable interference. Denise had tried to make the whole thing sound like I was complaining about sunlight. Rachel made it about a recorded right, a permit omission, and a financial loss that could be calculated. Then she sent the sentence that changed the tone of every email after that. No one owns the sun, but my client owns a recorded right to access the sunlight his system was designed to collect. After that, the HOA stopped joking about my panels. Their attorney asked for more time. The contractor blamed the board's change order. The property manager claimed she had assumed the contractor checked all site restrictions. Denise stopped sending community updates about the wall and started telling residents that the Clubhouse project was under routine county review. Routine. That word was almost funny. There was nothing routine about a county planner asking why a $180,000 wall had been built into a protected solar access corridor without disclosure. If you are listening to this and your HOA has ever told you something is already approved, remember this part. Approved by the board is not the same as legal. Approved by a committee is not the same as recorded. Approved by people who never read your deed is not approval at all. Comment your thoughts, because homeowners lose too many fights simply because they accept the word approved without asking approved by whom, under what document, and with what restrictions. Rachel then prepared the next step, a notice of intent to seek injunctive relief if the HOA refused to modify the wall. That meant we were not just asking for money after the damage. We were asking to stop the violation itself. If necessary, we would ask a court to force removal of the offending structure. That finally got Denise's attention. Because repainting a wall is one thing. Explaining to residents that a court might order the HOA to tear down a six-figure clubhouse feature because the board ignored a recorded easement is something else entirely. For the first time since construction began, the power shifted. The wall was still standing. The shadow was still crossing my roof. My battery was still undercharging in the afternoon heat. But now the wall had a file number. It had a permit review. It had an expert report. It had a recorded easement against it. And Denise, who once said the HOA was not responsible for where the sun fell, was about to learn that when sunlight is protected in a deed, blocking it can become the most expensive shadow in the neighborhood. The county inspection happened on a Monday morning, under the exact kind of sky that proved my point. No clouds. No haze. No weather excuse. Just clean desert sunlight, pouring across Willow Park Estates while the clubhouse wall threw a hard, sharp shadow across my roof like a line drawn by someone who had never expected to be measured. Rachel arrived first with a binder, the solar consultant arrived with his laptop and sun path diagrams, and the surveyor came with his equipment already loaded in the back of his truck. 10 minutes later, a county planning officer and a building inspector pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. Denise showed up last, wearing a white blazer and the kind of expression people use when they want everyone to believe a disaster is only an inconvenience. The inspector started with the permit file. On paper, the HOA had been approved for a decorative privacy wall and mechanical screen behind the clubhouse. The original plan showed a lower structure, placed to hide equipment and improve the patio view. But the wall standing in front of us was taller, heavier, and extended farther than the approved drawing suggested. The decorative tower sections and raised stone caps had made the shadow problem much worse. Then the planning officer asked about the solar access easement. That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Denise tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, saying the project had been approved by the board and built entirely on association land. Rachel calmly handed over the recorded easement, the deed, the survey, and the consultant report. The planning officer read the easement language, then looked at the wall, then looked at my roof. No one needed to be dramatic. The sun was doing the demonstration for us. The solar consultant opened his model and showed the protected collection area. Then he overlaid the wall's actual height and position. The shadow path lined up almost perfectly with the production drop in my system data. The timestamps on my photos matched the app logs. The app logs matched the consultant's model. The model matched what everyone could see standing there in real time. The inspector measured the wall. The surveyor confirmed the location. The consultant compared the shadow against the protected hours. By the end of the inspection, the question was no longer whether my panels had been affected. The question was why the HOA had built a wall into a recorded solar access corridor without disclosing it during permitting. Denise tried to shift blame to the contractor. The contractor's representative produced the change order showing the board requested the taller decorative section after approval. The property manager claimed she assumed legal review had already been completed. The board treasurer, who had come to observe, said almost nothing. That silence told the truth. The county issued a notice requiring Willow Park to submit a corrective plan. The violating section of the wall had to be lowered, removed, or modified to restore the protected solar access. Until then, no final approval would be granted for that portion of the clubhouse expansion. The county also flagged the discrepancy between the approved permit and the final construction height. That evening, Willow Park held an emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed. For weeks, residents had admired the new wall from the patio. Now they were hearing that the same wall might have to be cut apart because the board ignored a recorded easement. Denise tried to explain that the issue was technical and that the HOA was working cooperatively with the county. But residents were not satisfied with soft language anymore. They wanted to know why a $180,000 project had been changed after approval. They wanted to know why no one checked the deed restrictions near the clubhouse. They wanted to know whether special assessments would be needed to fix it. One homeowner asked why the board had mocked a solar complaint before confirming whether the easement was real. Rachel did not make a speech. She simply stated the facts: the easement was recorded, the wall interfered with the protected solar collection area, the permit file did not disclose the issue, and the county had ordered corrective action. That was enough. If you have ever watched an HOA board act powerful until the paperwork enters the room, you know exactly how that meeting felt. The people who had laughed at a shadow problem were now staring at invoices, permit questions, consultant reports, and the possibility that community money had been wasted because nobody read one recorded document. Within a week, the county issued the written correction order. The wall section behind my house had to be altered to eliminate the violation. The decorative tower had to come down. The raised cap had to be removed. A long section of the wall had to be lowered to a height that would no longer cast a substantial shadow on my protected solar area during the easement hours. Denise had called it a landmark investment in community beauty. The county called it non-compliant construction. And for the first time since the wall went up, my solar access was no longer being treated like a personal complaint. It was being enforced as a property right. The wall came down in sections. Not the whole clubhouse wall, because I never asked for that. I did not need to punish every resident for Denise's mistake. I only needed the part that violated the solar access easement corrected. But watching the crew return with saws, scaffolding, dust barriers, and a revised county-approved plan felt like watching the truth finally become physical. The decorative tower came down first. That was the tallest piece, the one Denise had insisted made the clubhouse feel more upscale. The contractor cut into the stone while residents stood on the patio pretending not to stare. Then the raised cap was removed. Then a long section of the wall behind my property was lowered until it no longer crossed the protected solar path during the easement hours. What had once been announced as a permanent symbol of community pride was reduced, measured, and reshaped because one recorded document had more authority than the entire HOA board. The county came back after the work was done. This time, the solar consultant repeated the shadow analysis. The surveyor confirmed the new height. I opened my monitoring app while standing in the backyard and watched the production curve climb the way it used to. By midday, my panels were clear. By early afternoon, the battery was charging properly again. For the first time in weeks, the graph looked normal. I had not realized how much stress I had been carrying until I saw that battery reach full charge. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked inside. She looked up and asked if the panels were working again. I told her yes. She smiled, patted my hand, and said my father would have kept the papers in 3 different folders. She was probably right. The final cost to Willow Park was worse than residents expected. The HOA had to pay for demolition, reconstruction, revised engineering, county reinspection, consultant review, part of my attorney's fees, and reimbursement for the extra electricity I had been forced to buy during the worst production loss. The contractor was investigated for completing change orders outside the approved permit scope. The property manager lost the account before the next quarter ended. And Denise lost her seat. At the next board election, residents did not care how beautiful the clubhouse looked. They cared that $180,000 of their money had been spent on a wall that had to be cut down because nobody checked the recorded restrictions. They cared that the board mocked a homeowner before reading the deed. They cared that a simple easement review could have prevented the entire mess. The new board passed a rule requiring legal review, permit verification, survey review, and easement checks before any construction near property lines, utility corridors, drainage areas, solar access zones, or private lots. It sounded basic, almost embarrassing, but expensive lessons usually turn into obvious rules after the damage is already done. As for me, I did not celebrate by rubbing it in. I went back to work. I fixed air conditioners. I checked on my mother. I watched the solar app every afternoon until I finally trusted the curve again. The wall was still there, lower now, less dramatic, no longer blocking what my deed had protected all along. That was enough. Because this was never about hating a clubhouse. It was never about stopping progress. It was never about one homeowner refusing to let the neighborhood improve. It was about a simple line in a recorded document that said my home had a right to collect sunlight in a certain place, at a certain time, without the HOA building over that right because stone looked nicer in a newsletter. Denise once told me the HOA was not responsible for where the sun happened to fall. She was half right. Nobody owns the sun. But property law can protect access to it when that right is written, recorded, and attached to the land. And when an HOA ignores that, the shadow they create can become much more expensive than the wall that casts it. So if you own solar panels, a private road, a drainage easement, a pond, a trail, or any piece of property someone else thinks would be more convenient if it belonged to the community, remember this story. Save your documents. Read your deed. Check the county records. Keep screenshots, photos, emails, permits, and data before anyone has a chance to rewrite the truth. And share this video with someone who thinks HOA problems are only about paint colors and mailbox rules. Sometimes an HOA does not steal your land with a fence. Sometimes they steal your power with a shadow. I did not win because I yelled louder than Denise. I did not win because I had more money than Willow Park. I won because I measured the loss, preserved the data, found the easement, hired the right experts, and let the record speak louder than the board president. The wall was built out of stone. But the thing that brought it down was paper. And in the end, that paper gave my house its sunlight back.